reflection in the x-axis versus reflection in the y-axis. So for reflection in the x-axis, the typical example is using the graph of square root of x. So the purple graph, do you see that? That is the square root of x. We start at 0, 0, and then square root of x when x is positive, y is positive. When x is 0, y is equals to 0. So that's why the curve is above the x-axis, because x has, in quadrant 1, x must be positive, y must be positive. When you take a square root of a positive number, you will never get negative, right? So that's why it is always above the x-axis. But what if you put a minus or -1 in front of the square root? So let me emphasize this. You put a negative in front of the square root. So you make it negative square root of x. Square root of x is always positive. You put a negative right in front of it, take the negative times positive, then you will get an always negative. Always negative means below the x-axis. This is still in quadrant 4, not in quadrant 2, because when you select an x value, x must be positive. The square root of -4 is undefined. Square root of -9 is undefined. You must select positive x value. Now, in general, when you put a negative in front of a function, you create a reflection in the x-axis. So I have more details for you. So for the purple, this square root, 2, 3, 4, 5, they are always positive or equal to 0, right? You can add square root of 0 as well. So that's why the square root of x is above the x-axis, but when you put a minus in front of each of these square root, you get always negative. So therefore, in general, when you put a minus in front of a function, you negative the entire function. You just put the entire function negative. As a result, you create a reflection in the x-axis. How about y-axis? So for y-axis, I use the same graph again in purple. The square root of x, y is always greater than 0 or equal to 0. Okay, so y is always positive or equal to 0. So I'm going to add this back. Y is greater than 0, so I should add that back as well, greater than or equal to 0, because we have a starting point at 0, 0. All right. Now, what happened when you put the negative right next to x? Do you see that in big red? I have a negative inside the radical. Then you are immediately thinking that, all right, the square root of negative is undefined. You're right, the square root of negative is undefined. So that's why when you put a square root right next to x, you have to select negative x value. So here, take a look at the red function. What happened when x is equals to -4? Then you have a negative 4, which becomes a positive 4. As a result, you get a positive y value. Okay, so here, an example, when x is equals to -1, you have a negative -1, then you get a positive 1. So that's why the curve is above the x-axis. So when you put a minus right next to x, you create a reflection in the y-axis. So here is what I wrote. Negative x, you just negative the independent variable. That means you create a reflection in the y-axis. So I have some good examples. You can try the third power, the cube root of x, negative the whole thing, and then put the negative inside. So let's see what will happen. I didn't give you any graphs. So match the color for cube root of x. You have this, right? So this is for the cube root of x. So what happened when you put a negative? When you put a negative in front of that, you create a reflection in the x-axis. This is the x-axis, right? So that means this piece will just go to the fourth quadrant, like that. And then what about this piece? Reflection in the x-axis will just flip to the second quadrant. Okay, let's check. When x is equals to 8, so we have the square root, the cube root of 8, and then the cube root of -8. So this is equals to 2. This is equals to -2, right? Am I right? And then what else? This one, when x is equals to 8, we have negatives. So 8, 2 is like right here, right? So 8, 2. This is a negative 8, a negative 2, and then this is a negative the cube root of 8, which is equals to -2. So we have 8, negative 2, and then negative 8. So we have a negative, the cube root of negative 8. This is a negative, negative 2, which is equals to 2. So when x is equals to negative 8, y is equals to positive 2. This is a reflection in the x-axis. So reflection in x-axis. And then how about the last one? You put that right next to x, then you create a reflection in the y-axis. So what do I mean by that? So it was supposed to be look like this. Now this will just go there. And then this, and then the other one, it is supposed to be look like that. Reflection, you will just flip that to the fourth quadrant right there. So this one will just look like the previous one because the shape of this graph. So this one, reflection of x-axis and reflection on the y-axis, they look pretty much the same, but the process is different because this is what we just did. So it was here, now it is here, reflection in the y-axis. And then the other piece, it was here, now it is here. So it's different than the previous one. And then when x is equals to 8, we have the cube root of negative 8, that is equals to negative 2, right? So we have x equals to 8, y equals to negative 2. And then when x is equals to negative 8, so the cube root of negative 8, that is equals to 2, which is right over here. So this is a reflection in the y-axis. I still suggest you to try this on decimals. All right, so that is the end of this lesson. I have more to say in the next video. I will meet you there.